After South Carolina's Week 1 debacle against North Carolina, Gamecock fans are now worried about Shane Beamer having a potential down year in his third season, something that's not as rare as you might think in college football.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and you can find my written work over on Gamecocks Digest on SI.com. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team every day. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. There are a lot of Gamecock fans out there that have been resetting their expectations for what South Carolina's football team could do in 2023 after what all happened in Week 1 against North Carolina, a game that obviously went sideways relatively quickly for the Gamecocks. And it's led a lot of people now to believe that this season could end up being a down year for Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks, that they might take a step back compared to what they have done over his first two seasons. And even though 2023 might go down that route, based on college football's recent history with some other coaches, I wouldn't be selling Shane Beamer's stock long term. Again, I know that there are a lot of you that are not happy with how the team performed this past Saturday. Trust me, everyone in that building is very upset and frustrated with how the team went out there and played in Bank of America Stadium in the Duke's Mayo Kickoff Classic. And I know that some of you are upset because some of the same issues that we have seen over the past couple years matriculated once again on the field in the Gamecocks season opener, such as a lack of consistent rush defense, a lack of a consistent ground game on the offensive side of the ball. I know that there are multiple reasons why you are now potentially even questioning whether or not Shane Beamer could be the guy long term, and I think we are a long ways away from having that kind of conversation. And if you look at the recent history of college football, if you look at other coaches that had a start similar to Shane Beamer at their respective stops, I think that you'll feel a little bit better about the possibility of there being a potential down year in 2023. Here is a list of coaches who had a great first two seasons and then took a step back in their third season at their respective school. Steve Spurrier is the first example that comes to mind here. He went 7-5 and 8-5 in his first two seasons in Columbia. And then in 2007, his third season, the Gamecocks went 6-6 and missed a bowl game entirely. Dabo Swinney at Clemson. He's another good example for this conversation. He went 4-3 as an interim head coach in 2008. Then in 2009, Clemson went 9-5. In 2010, Dabo's third season technically holding the head coaching title in some fashion in Clemson, the Tigers went 6-7. Had a losing record. Went to the Menike Car Care Bowl. I'm pretty sure that bowl game doesn't even exist anymore. There's also some more recent examples from the past couple of years. Dave Aranda at Baylor. He went 2-7 in his first season in Waco. And then he went 12-2 in his second season. But last fall, he went 6-7. So he took a pretty big step back from that 12-2 campaign that he had in 2021. Sean Clark at App State. He's another good example. He went 9-3 and 10-4 in his first two seasons, and then went 6-6 in 2022. Mack Brown, North Carolina, the team that just beat the Gamecocks. They also did not see linear progression over his first 4 or 5 years here. Mack Brown went 7-6 and 8-5 in his first two seasons in Chapel Hill, and then they went 6-7 in 2021. Sam Pittman at Arkansas is another example. Pittman went 3-7 and 9-4 in his first 2 seasons in Fayetteville, and then this past fall in 2022, the Razorbacks went 7-6. They went 6-6 in the regular season. So my overall point with bringing up all of those coaches is that even in recent history, with the transfer portal now being available, with NIL now being available to these football programs, a lot of these coaches have a down year at some point in time at the beginning of their tenure. And based on this slate of coaches that I picked out for today's show, usually it is year 3. So the fact that Shane Beamer, the Gamecocks, might take a step back is, first of all, not very far-fetched based on the other examples that we have and that we've discussed. And secondly, it's not far-fetched based off of some of the guys that the Gamecocks lost from their 2022 squad. I said, or at least hinted at, for the majority of this offseason, that I thought that this team was probably a 6-6 team. I did, of course, end up predicting they would go 7-5 the week before this season began. But point being, I did feel like that in some fashion, they would take at least a minor step back. So I don't think that it should be all too shocking that, this team might not win 9 games. This team most certainly is probably not going to win 10 games in 2023. And that is okay. And here's another aspect of this conversation that I want to address real quick. I know that some people look at a guy like Deion Sanders at Colorado, and you sit there and you tell me, well, Deion Sanders took over a 1-11 football program, completely revamped the roster, went all in on the transfer portal, brought in guys from all over the place, and in week 1, went to TCU, the national runner-ups from the 2022 season, went to their house and beat them on their own field in week 1. And because that happened, all of you are thinking, well, this doesn't excuse the idea that we should have to be patient about Shane Beamer and his progress here in Columbia when he's going into year 3. He's not just getting started at South Carolina. Not everybody is Deion Sanders. Not everybody has the name cachet that Deion Sanders has. Not everybody has the connections that Deion Sanders has. Shane Beamer's not Deion Sanders, but at the same time, Deion Sanders is not Shane Beamer. Shane Beamer has a much different idea of how he wants to build up this program. That does not mean that he is without flaws. That does not mean that he hasn't made some mistakes along the way in his first couple years here at South Carolina. But the bottom line takeaway point here that I want you all to have is Shane Beamer, based on all these other coaches that we discussed, he's going to have a down year more than likely in 2023. But that's okay. You look at some of the coaches that I talk about, Dabo Swinney and Steve Spurrier and Mac Brown. All 3 of those coaches won national championships or have won national championships at some point in their career. Dave Aranda has won a Sugar Bowl. Sam Pittman, he basically took Arkansas out of the ashes, helped them rise from the ashes of the Chad Morris era. All of these guys have had considerable success, or at least went on to have considerable success at their stops. So, you should not throw in the towel on Shane Beamer, even if he does have a bit of a down year this fall here at South Carolina. Now, another coach that deserves some discussion is Dowell Loggains, a coach that also, for some reason, has caught some backlash from some fans, which I guess should not be all that surprising. But with how last Saturday's game went, and with how he conducted himself at his Wednesday press conference, I'm beginning to think more and more so that Dowell Loggains is the man for the offensive coordinator position here at South Carolina. And I'm going to dive into why I think this way in just a couple moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Now, as a small business owner, you always want to have access to the most qualified candidates that can fill in positions in your small business. Whether you are a gym owner, whether you own a landscaping company, or maybe you own a consultation firm. If you find yourself in a position where you're struggling to hire or find the right people, then you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs today. Just add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring, and utilize tools like screening questions to filter through the candidates. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Welcome back to this Thursday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day. And speaking of every single day, thank you to each and every one of you every day for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. With what Dowell Loggains was able to do with the offense in week 1, and also how he conducted himself at his weekly Wednesday press conference, I think that he could be the offensive coordinator that finally makes South Carolina's offense respectable once again in the SEC and in all of college football. Let's start off, first of all, with Dowell Loggains' Wednesday press conference, because there were a couple different portions of his press conference that really stood out to me. Here's a clip and soundbite of Dowell Loggains talking about accountability, holding everybody accountable for last Saturday night's performance, especially himself.
With the understanding that everybody can do a little bit more, was there anybody on the offensive line who graded out individually that you were pleased with?
You know what? Like, here's what I was pleased with, and it's a tough question. But you know what? We cause these tough questions because we didn't perform the way we wanted to and need to. You win and lose as an offensive line playing through through one set of eyes, 5 guys playing through one set of guys. So like, you collectively, I could sit here and praise individual guys, and there were some guys that I will give them credit. They stayed in the fight and they played hard. When you watch Rashawn and Nick G, like, they're cleaning out the pocket at the end of the game. They stayed in the fight. Like, they never lost their belief or their will to win. They didn't. They played hard. That's what they're expected to do, but that's what they did. But when you play like that way, and it's not just the offensive line, like, it's the coaching staff, it's the offensive line, it's running backs, it's quarterbacks, it's wide receivers, it's tight ends, like, all of that contributes into a sack. All of that contributes into a negative run or a non-efficient run. So we win and lose as a group. I would say we all failed because that's the way it is. Like, that's if someone played in the game, we didn't do our jobs. We didn't coach well enough. We didn't play well enough, and we need a great deal of urgency to fix that now. This is the biggest game of the season for us because it's the next one, and we have a lot to play for. We need to clean some stuff out. We need to get this nasty taste out of our mouth as fast as possible. And that's why practice this week tomorrow is really, really important because we just got the practice, so we need to clean this tape up and get going towards next week. We need to help not just our offensive line, but our running backs, our tight ends, our quarterbacks as a coaching staff, and we got to clean some stuff up and help these guys be successful. So all of them, like, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm blaming myself. If you want to blame someone, you put it on me. Like, it's my job to make sure these guys play well. But as a group, as a unit, we didn't play well enough.
I love how accountable Dowell Loggains was with that answer, discussing what all happened this past Saturday. I love the fact that, as easy as it would be for him to single out the offensive line and what all they did, and he merely talked about them a good amount before they got to that question during his press conference, he did also make it clear that, hey, it's all 11 guys on the football field. Like, everybody has their assignment. Everyone has their own job to do. And he also took responsibility on his own end. He didn't put it all on the players. He didn't get all defensive about, the question being asked. In a way, Dowell Loggains really showed a great sense of professionalism. He really comes off here as a guy that has coached for a long time at the NFL level, because guys at the NFL, they're used to criticism like this. Reporters at the NFL level, they're not as gun shy maybe to ask certain coaches, like, about their performance, especially, whether it's good or if it's bad. And that's not to say that, us college reporters are not willing to ask the tough questions, but obviously, when you talk about the NFL, you're talking about, grown men all over the place at every single aspect of an organization, the players, coaches, and people in the front office. And he also had a great sense of urgency with his answer. The fact that he says that, we need to get things fixed right now. And again, he admitted that the offensive line is going to be a work in progress. It's going to be something that's not going to necessarily get better immediately, but they're going to do everything that they can, everything in their power to try to find the solution to that. And comparing Dowell Loggains to his predecessor, Marcus Satterfield, and I'm not trying to just completely poke at Satterfield as much as I can every chance I get, but the thing is, with Marcus Satterfield, he always came across as a coach that would just kind of simply agree with the idea or a question from a reporter regarding maybe a bad performance, kind of just go along with the question saying like, yeah, we do need to do better. And I don't want to say not take accountability, but he was as upfront about it as Dowell Loggains was in this clip and soundbite right here. Now, here's another part of Dowell Loggains' press conference that I want to play for all of you real quick. Another clip and soundbite where he discusses how he tried to change play calls. He tried to change up his strategy in order to help out both Spencer Rattler and South Carolina's rushing attack when they needed it against North Carolina.
Dowell, just kind of sticking with the run game, what can you do from a coaching standpoint, whether it's run replacements, different schemes, different personnel in it to kind of get that thing more efficient?
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you right now, like there are going to be games when you say, hey, a 3-step or empty is a run play, or a screen is a run play. Like that's the way I look at it. And that in that game, I don't know how many hitches we threw or how many quick game. I know exactly how many we threw. So all of a sudden you put another 7 or 8 plays on there that are 9, and you're averaging 9.1 attempt. Like that's a pass. So then as the game went on, those 3 steps became and empties became run plays. Now, can you live that way? No. But you play each game, well, you got to do whatever you got to do to find the formula to help you to try to win, and that was the formula in that one. As coaches, you go back and you look at everything. You look at why are we not successful? Was it one-on-ones? Were our combinations? Did we lose one-on-one battles? Were our combinations not good? Did we run into the right looks? Did we run the play that we wanted to the shade? Is it better to the 3? Are we accounting for down safeties, digging out safeties by the wide receivers? Are we running enough play action pass to make sure that we're holding the backside end? Are we moving the pocket enough? Like you look at everything. And that's the process of this week, is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure our players are put in a situation to be successful.
A lot of Gamecock fans are going to view this answer as a massive breath of fresh air, because when Marcus Satterfield talked to the media during his 2 years in Columbia, he always seemed to have issues sort of explaining his thought process when he was talking to the media and giving answers regarding, certain decisions that were being made in game. And speaking of in-game decisions, Marcus Satterfield always seemed to be a guy that, if a certain play worked once, he went back to the well with that play over and over again. And there were also certain plays during some games where, it wasn't working all that well, and yet you saw South Carolina continue to try and run that exact play. And it just never really seemed like that Marcus Satterfield had a great feel for the game. It seemed like his game sense wasn't all that high for being an offensive coordinator at this level. I don't get that feeling with Dowell Loggains. Dowell Loggains comes off as a guy that he understands like every little minute aspect of offensive football when he gives an answer like that. We don't have to understand exactly what he means by, this, that, or the other with the tight end, the wide receiver, and whatnot, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that he understands it, and as the players have said all offseason, he's a guy that is able to explain it to these guys, and he's also open to feedback in terms of plays that they want him to run in this offense. And you take all this back to the North Carolina game. I know that fans are not happy because South Carolina, they only scored, 17 points, 14 points in that contest. And it was a very ugly path to those points because South Carolina, they had no run game. -2 rushing yards on 31 carries. Nobody ever wants to see that stat line in your box score at the end of a game. They gave up 9 sacks. And on multiple occasions, one or more receivers were wide open down the field. And yet, despite that, South Carolina was never out of this game because of their offense entirely. Spencer Rattler still threw for 350 plus passing yards. Now, I'm not saying all the credit has to go to Dowell Loggains for that, because clearly Spencer Rattler deserves a ton of credit in his own right, but Loggains also deserves props for setting up Spencer in as good of a situation as he possibly could, considering all of the circumstances that were at play in Charlotte. So you take that performance with what all he said in this Wednesday press conference. I know it's just one game. I know that fans are going to want to see an improved product as the year progresses. But I truly feel like if Dowell Loggains is given time, if this offense can just get some more talent up front and then also offset some of the losses they're going to have eventually at positions like the wide receiver position, Dowell Loggains can be the man that helps to rectify a lot of the issues that this unit has had basically for the last 8 or 9 years, since 2015, the first year where things really fell off a cliff on that side of the ball. So I know that in week 1, especially because of the low total of points that they scored, it's easy for people to sit there and point the finger at Dowell Loggains and say, he did not do a good enough job. He's just another Marcus Satterfield. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't feel that way with him. I think this is a guy that knows what he's doing. I think this is a guy that truly cares. And I think this is someone that understands how to operate in his position. A feeling that we did not always have with the last guy that was in that role. So give Dowell Loggains some time, and I think that he will be able to find a way to really make this offense go at a very efficient level for South Carolina's football program. Now, this upcoming weekend against Furman, South Carolina, they're in a touch of a sticky situation at wide receiver because some of their starters are a little bit banged up coming into this game. And they've got to find a way to get some of these guys more involved in the passing game. And I'm going to discuss one way in which Dowell Loggains could possibly help some of these backups get more involved against the Furman Paladins. We'll touch on that in just a moment right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Now, South Carolina's football team began their season this past Saturday night in Bank of America Stadium. And guess what? The team that typically plays in that stadium, the Carolina Panthers, they're beginning their football season this coming Sunday afternoon against the Atlanta Falcons. And you might be a Panthers fan that's contemplating whether or not you want to try to beat the Atlanta traffic and go to that game on Sunday. And if you end up making the last-minute decision to do so, Game Time is going to have you covered because they got deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. They'll also give you the lowest price guarantee if you find a lower price in that same section and row. They'll credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms will apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to this Thursday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day in just 30 minutes. Dowell Loggains showed a lot of creativity, in my opinion, in terms of how he varied up his sets and formations against North Carolina this past Saturday. And I think that he could use that creativity to try and help some of these backup wide receivers make a bigger impact in this coming Saturday night matchup against the Furman Paladins. Dowell Loggains used specifically of staggered stack sets in the shotgun formation could help some of these backups at wide receiver find some more success. Now, here's what I'm talking about. In a staggered stack set formation in the shotgun, you have two wide receivers that are practically stacked up right on top of each other. You got one that's crept up closer to the line, and you've got a wide receiver basically right behind him just by a few feet. Now, a staggered stack set is where you've got a wide receiver lined up on the line of scrimmage, and he still has a wide receiver basically right behind him, but the wideout is lined up shaded to one side of the wide receiver that is in front of him, so not directly behind him. Now, you might be sitting here and wondering, Andrew, what the heck does all that mean, and why could this help some of these backup wide receivers? Here's how this could help some of the backup wideouts. When you run a stack set in the shotgun formation, the wide receiver that is lined up farther behind the line of scrimmage, they have a distinct advantage in that set. And that advantage is this: they're not having to deal with contact from a defensive back right off of the snap. Sometimes when you're lined up right on the line of scrimmage, defensive backs will creep up right up on you. They'll line up in man press coverage, and you'll have to deal with a ton of contact once the ball is snapped. For a guy like Nicholas Harper, that's not necessarily ideal, because Nicholas Harper, he's still trying to transition to his new role being a full-time wide receiver. He's still trying to learn the nuances of the position. And let's just say, trying to learn how to break away from a cornerback in man or man press coverage off of the line of scrimmage, that's not necessarily wide receiver 101 type stuff. That's a little bit more advanced. And so, while Nicholas Herbert tries to really hone in on his skills in that area in practice, in the middle of a football game in the early portion of this season, Dowell Loggains is going to have to try to figure out ways to help him and also some of these other guys like an Elijah Caldwell and also an Omega Blake, who, yes, has been in the program for several years now, but struggled mightily this past Saturday to really make an impact against North Carolina. Running these stack sets is a great way to get these guys involved because, again, they don't have to deal with a defensive back making contact with them right as they're running off of the line of scrimmage. For defensive backs, they hate having to play against stack sets and also bunch sets because when you've got multiple players concentrated in one particular area on the football field, you can't necessarily run a specific coverage. You cannot run man coverage because you can't have two defensive backs basically lined up right on top of each other on top of that stack or right on a bunch set. But if you also run zone coverage, the tough part about running that kind of coverage is you open the door for the wide receiver that's lined up furthest behind the line of scrimmage to basically just run some sort of underneath route and therefore give up guaranteed yardage. In essence, you can't necessarily stop offensive plays that are run out of those sets as a defensive player. All you could do is basically try to avoid giving up an explosive play out of those sets. Now for South Carolina, they're not going to be like a Tennessee that likes to run those kind of sets a lot, especially those stack sets far outside the numbers, and have a bunch of different route combinations that open the door for a bunch of shot plays. That would be maybe great for a Nicholas Harper, but for an Omega Blake and an Elijah Caldwell, you don't necessarily need that right now for each of those guys. But running these stack sets, it is going to basically give them a free release off of the line of scrimmage. And that is one less thing, therefore, that these backups have to worry about when they go out there on the field. Obviously, you cannot run that every single time for each and every one of those guys. Numbers-wise, that just wouldn't work out very well for you. But after game one thing is blatantly clear and obvious with this wide receiver corps. The Gamecocks offensive coaching staff has got to find a way to get more of these true wide receivers more involved. Basically, you cannot have your second string quarterback in Luke Doty going out there on the football field and be your second leading receiver in a football game. Again, great for Luke Doty. He is definitely a guy that is willing to do anything for this program, and Gamecock Nation will forever love him because of how much he cares about putting the team first before himself. You have to commend that. It is also fair, however, to say that it's not necessarily ideal for your backup quarterback to ever be your second leading wide receiver. Quite frankly, some of these other guys have just got to step up or they got to grow up fast. That's the best way really to put it. Juice Wells right now, he's not 100%. It is very clear that he's got some sort of nagging injury in his lower body that he is dealing with right now. And he's going to play again on Saturday against Furman. I would still suspect he's not going to be 100%. He might not even be able to go throughout the entire football game, especially if it rains like it's forecasted to do so right now. Amari Brown suffered a rib injury this past weekend against North Carolina. was out for the rest of the game that night because of it. Now, he's also practiced, but you don't know if that's also leaving some lingering effects with him. Xavier Legette, he can't do it all by himself. He's got to have some help. So some of these backup wide receivers, again, they got to go out there and make plays. But this is a way for Dowell Loggains to try to scheme those guys open and allow them, therefore, to use their athleticism and their pure ball skills as a wide receiver to just go out there and help take some of the pressure off of Xavier Legette and also off of Spencer Rattler, so that Rattler does not feel like that he has to basically just hone in and target Xavier Legette for an entire football game. It's going to be very important to establish some sort of rhythm, some sort of rapport between Spencer Rattler and these backup wide receivers on Saturday against Furman, because you know who's up next? Georgia. You know who's up after them? Mississippi State. You know who's up after them? Tennessee. You don't have time to get acclimated, quite frankly. They've got to get these guys acclimated and more involved right now. Running stack sets out of the shotgun formation that allows a free release for those wide receivers that are lined up farther off of the line of scrimmage. That's the best way to get these backup wide receivers involved in this game against Furman on Saturday night. With that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I hope y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show, as always. What are y'all's thoughts on Shane Beamer potentially having a down year in year 3? Are you going to panic if that takes place? Or, with the data that we went over on today's show, do you think that it's fair to still have patience with Shane Beamer for the next several years? What do you think about Dowell Loggains and his potential long-term as South Carolina's offensive coordinator? What were your thoughts on his comments that he made at his Wednesday presser? And lastly, how do you think that Dowell Loggains can help some of these backup wide receivers get more involved on Saturday? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or shoot me a direct message on Twitter at @aline_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. Once again, thank y'all so much for tuning in as always. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.